RPS suffered a power outage, and they discovered that it was at the Burro Canyon substation, where the problem was at. So far in conversations today, we have found out that the problem is down to a lightning arrestor on a transformer.
Yeah, that's the latest thing I've heard, Marty. You know, and I want to be cautious about saying that, but that's the latest thing I've heard. So if that turns out to be true, and they can expedite installing the new one, and that Tri-State G&T can make their connections so that the Springer sub can be disconnected from our system, we could be back to normal in a couple hours. That's possible. On the other hand, we could have to do rolling brownouts in the residential circuits tonight, because our load peaks up between 5 and 9 at night, and we've been running right on the edge all day long as far as using just about all the power they have for us through the Springer subs. So you know, that's kind of situation we have. It could turn out okay today, but you know, we may have to go to rolling brownouts tonight anyway. We'll just have to see how it goes.
This is a situation that could happen anytime that we have a power outage that's an extended power outage. This is something that we could be dealing with even in the future. The question is, how long into the future at this point? Because RPS is working on a couple of things, and can either one of you allude to what's going on there?
Well, right now what we're looking to, and the board has been in discussion, is other generation to cover our base load. And that's been something that's been on our mind all the time ever since we closed down number 5, which was our coal fire plant, that we need to have something in place. We did have Wartzilla, which we thought would serve that purpose. Unfortunately, it blew a cylinder, and we no longer have that in play. So we've been dealing with the insurance company, which is Hartford Steam Boiler, to come to an agreement and a settlement that we can both live with, in order to take those insurance dollars and look at what we can build for the future as far as generation. One of the considerations that we're looking at, and is very probable and probably more economically feasible for a small community such as ours, is a small gas-fired engine, and it's 4.3 approximately megawatts. So we are in the process of looking. We have an engineering company that is looking into that, seeing what it's going to take for us to be able to do that. So that is something that's hopefully not too far out in the future.
Let's back up just a little bit, Kathy, and what's the history as to why we no longer have the coal-fired power plant?
Well, the primary reason why we don't have the coal-fired plant any longer is because it was an older unit, the final one. We had 5 units throughout the history of RPS. Number 3 and number 5 were the last 2 operational. And at one point, number 3, and I don't remember exactly when that was turned off. Number 5 used to generate all of the information for, or the energy for us, which was probably anywhere from 8 to 9 megawatts. So we were able to carry the community on that. Because of EPA regulations and emissions and the availability of coal, we were basically forced to have to close that down.
Okay, and at this point, bringing number 5 back up is really not an option because of those regulations and the cost of coal, and we're far enough down the line that new regulations have come in that just make it almost impossible to do.
Exactly. Yeah, it would just not even be economically feasible for us to attempt to bring that unit or even another cold fire unit on board.
Well, in fact, the data coming out of the American Public Power Association is there's almost no coal-fired plants being built in the country right now, anywhere. And here in New Mexico, the San Juan Generating Station run by PNM, it's real touch and go right now whether they're going to be able to continue to operate that plant, which is coal-fired.
Right. We've looked at what are some of the other options. Is it an option to get with Springer Electric and beef up the line coming from Springer going through Maxwell? I talked to David this morning, and in his conversation, he kind of indicated that the size of the line between here and there was the biggest limiting factor, keeping us from using that solidly. There's plenty of power going into the substations in Springer, being that Tri-State has one, and then they feed Springer. Would there be a possibility of upgrading or even building a new line from
We
up?
have had discussions, although they be brief with Springer, over the years, but that has been a consideration that the board has looked at for years. Is it possible, is Tri-State and or Springer willing to upgrade that line from the south? And are we capable through some type of an agreement to also participate in that? So yeah, we're well aware that the line size is the biggest hindrance that we have of being able to be served from the south. Unfortunately, we're sitting here and we are at the end of both lines. We're coming from the north, we are sitting here with Barrow Canyon. From the south, we depend on Springer, and the whole circle depends on Tri-State and how that whole system works. So again, transmission is not cheap. We're aware of that, neither is generation. So it's a matter of economics, and if we could work out something with Dave, and I know Dan has, reached out to him, and we've had conversation hoping that we could get together and discuss some of those possibilities. We do have an emergency agreement in place that's been in place for years with Springer Electric for this very purpose that we're seeing today.
We've got a real unique situation, though. We have an insurance policy on Wardzilla, and it is very specific. I can't talk exact dollar amounts, but we can take about 60% of that policy value, and the board has a choice. They could take that 60% of the policy value and spend it on anything they want, or they can add another 40% above the whole policy value, but then they have to spend it on building a natural gas-fired generator. And that is a pretty easy choice.
Right.
And that's the direction we're heading in our planning right now. Because when we talk about any other option, we've got solar proponents in town. We talk about building up the wires on the Springer line. That's 40 miles long, probably plus some more substation work. The way this insurance policy is working out, it makes the money side of the question a really slam dunk decision, frankly.
So it's more of the driving force behind the initial decision as to what we need to do up front first off.
Well, I think that, and also every time we get into one of these outage situations, like Kathy's alluded to, we know what it feels like to be, the little fish, the little guy on the end of a long string, and we feel a sense of powerlessness. Right. that like the last 24 hours is very frustrating. And, I think everybody wants to have more power over their own fate. They'd rather trust themselves than be totally dependent on somebody who's much bigger, more powerful, but very far away.
Right.
And that feeling returning to the independence that we've enjoyed in the past at RPS, and this insurance policy thing, I think those two things together are driving us to pursue the going back to our own generation, at least for a base load.
Right.
You know, so the way I'd summarize it, an outsider coming in, those are the two things I see, is the desire for independence and a little more control of our own destiny, and this the money deal is very much slants the decision-making process.
Right. Now, upgrading the line between Springer and Raton would actually be more beneficial to Tri-State, in that then they could wheel power either direction. They're bringing in power now from the west and from the south into Springer. This would give them another loop to bring in power from the north, even though they are bringing in power now from the north end of the Farley substation, which, as I understand, Union County commissioners gave their approval last month on, or either earlier this month, for the go-ahead on wind generator construction out in the Farley area. Granted, wind is not considered base load power, it's intermittent type power, but having that loop back into Raton would be one big loop for Tri-State, Springer Electric, for RPS and everybody. Yet, as you say, transmission is expensive, but you know, these are things that the RPS board will be able to look at down the line.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, it's something that we're not ruling out being able to help pursue or help Tri-State and Springer Electric with that pursuit of upgrading the South Line, because yes, I mean, we all understand that that continuous loop benefits Tri-State and all the communities and the co-ops that they serve. So, I mean, not only for us, but also for them as well. We happen to have the one little section in between there that is not Tri-State's property, which is Burrow Canyon Line, which we acquired through the settlement with ARPA, Arkansas River Power Authority. So again, that is owned by the city of Raton and RPS and the ratepayers of this community. So it's something that, again, understanding what transmission costs are and what replacement costs are, we strive extremely hard to maintain some type of capital just in case some catastrophic accident should happen with that line. Because at that point, then we are on our own.
And yesterday was a perfect example of why we need to maintain that, because if it had been a transformer, say it had been our transformer here
Right.
in the substation, that's close to $1 million item.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that cost is, but yes, it's very costly. And I think, you know, that too, like Dan was indicating with, you know, the insurance settlement and what we think we can do. I mean, granted, if we could go out and build a plant that would supply all of our needs, that would be fantastic, but it's not economically feasible. I mean, we could do it, but our ratepayers wouldn't like the cost that it's going to be, because obviously that's where the burden would lie, is back on the ratepayers of the city of Raton and the users of the RPS system. Would, you know, that's, we don't just find money out of the sky, and unlike co-ops, USDA money is not available to us because we are a municipal electric company. So those federal grants and those federal dollars aren't necessarily available to us as readily as they are to co-ops and other entities that are able to take advantage of those type of things.
Well, one thing we're going to be working on, we get a little further down this road with building the base power generator, is we're going to start meeting with the gas utility, and we're going to have to do some long-range planning about 10 years out, because our contract with Twin Eagles expires in January 2023. And one of the things I think that we really want to explore is, building this baseload generator in, let's say, 18 months to 2 years, and then trying to run it at the right times and work with Twin Eagles so we can start to generate some extra cash. If we do that, let's say for 4 or 5 years, we may be in a position at that point to buy a second unit without having to borrow a whole lot more money, because our debt situation, our declining load, declining revenues, and our debt is pretty high already, really prohibits us just going out and borrowing more money. Like Kathy said, if we did that, we would have to do a significant rate increase, which people like even less than these outages.
Right.
Although today it might be a toss-up.
Right. One thing that Raton has always been self-sufficient. Historically, we have been self-sufficient. In the 1980s, Clayton had gotten to the point where generating their own power had become cost prohibitive, and they decided to shut down their power plant, and they sold their system to, at that time, P&M. It was between P&M and Southwestern Electric. Right. And they didn't take very long to find out that not being able to generate their own power was an issue. And they were also in a similar situation to us in that the line that came in from the west could provide the power, but if they had to switch to Southwestern Electric, they were marginal at best at the time. Has RPS even thought about the possibility of totally selling out the power system?
No. I mean, it's been in discussions, and as far as that's concerned, other people have said, well, instead of us keeping our own electric system, wouldn't it be wiser if we didn't sell out? And the reference that you made to Clayton is the pure example as to why we want to maintain as much as we can and have the capital in order to ensure that we can maintain, whether it's our distribution and generation and or some type of contract, which we were extremely lucky when we went out for bid with Twin Eagle at that, to be able to secure the contract that we did for a 10-year period of time. Because I think by the end of this contract, 6.2 cent power is not going to be available to anyone out there, including ourselves. I think, what we're going to be able to generate it for and purchase that gas for is probably going to be a push. But at that point, everybody's going to be in the same boat, but we're not going to be out there going, oh, we've, spent all of our capital, or it's all been used here, here, and here, and we don't have anything to show for it and still don't have a system in place. Unfortunately, as Clayton found themselves in. You sell it out, you've got a few dollars then, but down the road, you're again at the whim of P&M or whatever company is selling the product to you.
Yeah, that tends to be a real short-sighted decision. This is the 5th public power agency I've worked with. And Longmont, Colorado, Gallup, Farmington, Tulia, Texas. And without exception, those communities, they all had a chance at one time or another. You'd get in a situation you'd be behind the 8 ball in a tough time when people start talking about that. But my observation throughout my career is if cities, whether they be small or large, in the long run can do very well managing their own affairs. For example, Farmington has far lower rates right now than P&M does. And P&M is facing all kinds of mega challenges right now. And a municipal can do really, really well and provide and be a real asset to the community that an investor-owned utility really isn't. I'm a firm believer based on my career that a community doing it right on their own in the long run will be further ahead. I really believe that.
And Raton is headed down that path.
Well,
with the
you know,
Wardzilla
we've
unit.
got a real opportunity with this insurance settlement to do something right. And I think part of our problem before was this satellite effect. We were a small cog in the ARPA wheel, and I don't think the decision making at critical moments in the past, we were members of ARPA, would have been as good if Raton was doing it themselves. I really believe that.
The biggest problem that we've got right now with the Wardzilla unit is just getting the contract with the insurance company, getting all of that worked out. It hasn't happened overnight like a lot of people would like, or as you know, we keep having an occasional power outage brings to the front burner again. But
and
that's very close. You indicate that that's very close to being complete at this point in time.
yes, and
Yeah, I
not
think
only that, I think, you know, Wardzilla, at the time that ARPA and Raton, because it was originally a project that Arkansas River Power Authority and the community of Raton shared in on. And, you know, it was thought to be one of those safeguards so that we would have the ability to produce the majority of our energy needs and help supplement ARPA communities when they needed it, which was the reason why the authority was put together originally. So, you know, the hopes were that that's what it would accomplish. Unfortunately, it was pretty much a lemon, I think, from the get-go, and our RPS made the determination that come hook or crook, we were going to figure out what was wrong with it, get it running, and make it operate so that we would have that backup. We brought in Wardzilla, they did a complete overhaul. 2 weeks later, it is what it is. So, yes, the plan has always been to have some type of supplemental, you know, base load so that we are not hanging out there. So the insurance, you know, monies are an important part of that, because we did have to finance not only our first half of Wardzilla, but also when we did the settlement, we had to go back and finance dollars to complete that arrangement. So those are on the books, and we don't want to have to go back out and borrow additional dollars in order to supply ourselves with this generation that we're exploring right now. So yes, RPS, you know, is very business minded. However, they're also very in tune to the fact that City of Raton is accustomed to having electricity whenever they flip that switch, and when they don't necessarily like it, nor do we. And, you know, safety and health and public concerns are definitely a major part of our consideration, knowing that people need that power in order to, as life-saving measures or just public health measures, as well as commerce. So, you know, it's important for us to do what we can to maintain that and not be out stuck on the end of the line, so to speak.
Well, this is, Marty, I think it's really important to tell the public that this negotiations with the insurance company, you got to look at that from a long-term perspective, because you're talking about the value of that policy is almost equal to our annual budget. And getting as much money as we can out of that with the best terms we can get, you got to evaluate that from a long-term perspective. Because if we make the right decision and we go ahead and get things running properly, that could benefit Raton for 30 or 40 years. You know, and I know people get impatient and frustrated, and we talk in this handout about now we got to go do permitting and we got to do all this. You know, I think people think, oh, you know, are we in over our heads? Yeah, I don't think so. I think you just gotta look at the long term in this situation with the insurance money. I think that, you know, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, if everything goes south for us, you know, the conversation about the long-term future of the utility, you know, that might come up. But right now, I think it'd be a terrible time to talk about that, because we've really got a good opportunity here if people look at it from the long term.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.